Hi guys, I'm going to walk you through gathering the parts to the Bowdrill today, and then we'll take some time and try and put the whole thing together. If you'd like to join along, if you've got the right materials and you're someplace you can socially distance yourself out in the wilderness, then feel free to do that. Let's take a look what we need here. I've got my tools here. I've got a nice solid knife, not a folding knife. I've also got a saw with me. That'll be really helpful. This is just a real simple camp saw. There we go. And you'll want something like this if you're going to do this. Also remember to please be very careful with the materials. You don't want to cut yourself today. Remember proper knife safety. Going to the hospital right now is probably not the best idea, or anytime, but please be careful. We're going to try and take a little hike here and see what we can find. One thing that we're looking for, one of the big things we're looking for, is the spindle and the fireboard part of the set. They're the most particular pieces that we need to find, and they need to be either certain types of wood or at least wood that's soft enough. What we're looking for is some really soft wood that will make a coal very easily for us. So one thing that you can do, that you should do, is of course learn all of your trees. That would be ideal. Become a good naturalist, learn your trees, be able to recognize them with leaves on, with leaves off in the wintertime, in the fall, in the spring, summer, whole year round. But if you don't know your trees, as you're learning, you can do quite a bit with just what we call the thumbnail test. So if we look at a piece of cedar that we were playing with, this is white cedar. This is what we had in class that you guys were carving on already. This is actually the demo piece that I had for you. If you look here, I'm going to try and do the thumbnail test here for you if I can get this in focus. There we go. So on a piece of wood that you've cut, not on the bark, but you'll press your thumbnail in. If your thumbnail goes in pretty easily, look at that nice dent I made. Now that's with the grain. It's a little harder to go against the grain. Typically that means that the wood's pretty good for a Bowdrill fire. You want soft wood. That's basically what I'm testing here, right? So if you don't know anything about types of woods or trees, at the very least you can walk around, pick up different things, bust a little piece off, carve a little flat spot, see if your thumb depresses into it pretty easy. After you get used to this, as soon as you pick up a piece of wood and carve on it a little bit, you know pretty much right away whether it's soft enough or not. But it's great practice to even try with some harder woods. I've made fires with just about every type of wood. Actually, every type of wood I've ever gathered, I've made a fire with. At some point, it's just a matter of how good you are and how much patience you have and how hard you want to work at it, and how much noisy squeaking you can endure. So let's try and take a little hike, see what we can find. Around here in southern Indiana, some of the best woods for making a fire naturally like this would be things like basswood, big tooth aspen, all the aspens, cottonwood, trees like that that are very, very soft. I would say 90% of the time around here, I find myself using big tooth aspen. It's a little bit harder to find basswood. You've got to be kind of in the right spot. If you can find an area where the big tooth aspen's growing, that works really well. Sometimes I use white pine. Now, pines are a weird thing. You kind of need to stay away from any part of a pine that's very resinous. Red pines are super resinous, so that's like pretty much a no-go on those. But some of the white pines are pretty soft, and that's like you could pick up a 2x4 at the hardware store, and it's likely made out of either pine or fir. So if you stay away from the real sappy regions, the knots and things like that, you could do this just fine with a 2x4 once you split out a piece. So kind of keep that in mind. My valley that I live in here is kind of difficult. There's really not a lot of great trees for making fires. I would probably, if I had to walk around longer, I'd probably try and find something like maybe a piece of sassafras that was rotten enough, that was soft enough. But usually sassafras, when it's freshly dead, is pretty hard stuff to make a fire out of. It's tough, fairly tough wood to carve. But we'll see what we can find as we take a little hike here. Let's head out here. Let me get my stuff back on. Okay. So we'll just head up the valley here, and actually there's some dead sassafras branches on the ground, and so that brings up a pretty good point. You don't want to gather anything off the ground, like ever, if you can manage it. If you do, you need to dry it out for a good period of time before you use it, because everything on the ground is damp. And one thing that I'll sometimes do is I might look up into a tree, like this is a nice little grove of sassafras here. I might look up top to see if I can find any branches, and there's one there. I could climb up there and try and bust that down, or I could throw a stick at it, try and knock it down, see if it's good material. But I'm kind of willing to bet that this is not the greatest. These are all alive, by the way. So how do you tell a sassafras tree? Oh my goodness, there's lots of ways. Here's one way to tell. They have this really nice red bark once you chip off the outer stuff. There you go, nice little view there. They also have a nice smell to them. If you break a fresh branch, you can smell it. This is the tree we make root beer out of, actually, the roots. But even the branches and the twigs will smell, and they're kind of tasty. So we're gonna kind of head along here, see what we can find. This is not focusing very well. Sorry guys, I'm kind of new at this whole video making thing. Oh boy, we're gonna try and go up this hillside here. So here's actually a pretty good example, I bet, here of some wood that is too far gone. So if I'm doing the thumbnail test and I'm trying to get you guys where you can see this. There we go. There we are. So this is on the ground, so I wouldn't want to use it anyway, but if I blunt my fingernail into this, I can dent it very easily, especially down here. You can already tell, look at how rotten this is. Like, if I can just chip off pieces of this with my fingernail, it's too soft. It's just gonna crumble as soon as you try and wrap a string around it. You probably won't even be able to carve it. So there is such a thing as too soft, okay? That's way too soft. So let's head up the hill here. Remember, we really need all the parts, so I'm kind of looking for everything at once. Oh, this is pretty steep. All right, you're gonna have to hold on a second because I'm gonna have to throw you because I need my hands and my feet to go up this thing. There we go. All right, partway up the hillside. It's pretty steep out here in the valley. And what I was heading towards was this tree right here. As you can see, going up this thing, it's pretty obviously dead. We don't want to use anything alive for really any parts of our Bowdrill set. So this, I caught my eye because it's very good hand drill material. This, if we look down here, I can feel along this, and you can see the bark's just kind of flaking right off. It's totally dead. I would find a spot where my hand fit pretty nicely along this. Okay. Now this is a really hard wood. I know that ahead of time because I know my trees, but you could try and dent with your thumbnail. There's no way I'm denting that. Okay, I mean, not even close. This is dogwood. It's really common around our forests and oftentimes dies like this. It's an understory tree, and it will many times develop a nice little crack along the side of it. And if I cut a piece of this out, I can just put my knife alongside that and bust it right open. So it's gonna take me a little while, so I'll probably come back to this, and I'll use my saw to saw out a nice section for my hand, just like we did in class, and then we'll just split it and have a nice handhold on one side. So what would you do if you didn't have a saw? It's kind of advanced. We're not gonna get into working with rocks, but what I would typically do if I don't have a saw is I would be pushing this tree probably right over. Should be pretty easy to do. In fact, let me just try and show you here. Boom, right? And it broke off with a nice little root ball there. Okay. And so then I would probably find two trees that were close together, put it between the two trees and pry it until I split it and broke it, and maybe a nice piece would just break off. If it didn't, I would take what I had broken off down to a creek and find some big rocks and pretty much bash it until I busted a piece off that I could use in my hand. It could take a little while, but not too much work really. So I'll pick this guy up on the way back down here. Then I've broken half of it off. And just throw it here. Oh, look at that. A little flower. Whoa! Okay, check that out. That's going to be one we're going to learn about here soon enough. Take a look at the leaves. we'll be talking about this guy. It's actually one of the plants that we can eat. So I'm going to try and head back up the hill here. One thing that I'm not doing a good job of here is showing you guys the lesson that in nature, it's not really a supermarket. You have to kind of be prepared to wander. There's not like an aisle 3 where the toilet paper's at, and an aisle 4 where, well, there's probably no toilet paper right now. But you get the drift. Usually you have to wander. Sometimes it can take hours to find the parts that you need. Usually I'm a lot more particular, just because if I need to make a fire, like I need to make a fire and I want it to work the first time, I don't want to be spending hours and hours going back out again to gather and recarve new parts, because that takes time. So most of my time would be spent trying to find just the right materials so that the carving and everything else is easy. Okay, let's see, getting up here a little higher now. Some beech trees. Another little sassafras here. Yeah, that one's alive. Get along here. So here's something that's dead and might be about the right size for a spindle. It's kind of denting okay. There, you can see that there. There's no bark left on it. The bark's all peeled off. This is gonna be, I already know this is gonna be a little bit hard, but might give it a try anyway, just to show you guys. So it's nice and dry. I wouldn't want to pick up any part down there from near the ground, because that's definitely wet, unless I had time to let it dry. This is a piece, by the way, of smooth sumac, if you know your trees. It's a smaller tree. Now, how do I know that? Oh God, then you're gonna ask me that. Well, it's growing in a little grove of them, so that's helpful. The other thing, maybe some of its bark is a little flaky, so it's kind of got this look to its bark. It's all peeling off, kind of looks like that. So I try and find a stretch along this. It's nice and light, pretty dry. Probably just bring this with me. Okay, so what else do we need? We've got a handhold material, we've got spindle. We should be able to make a fireboard out of this as well if we're really careful. It's not very thick. It'd be better to have a thicker piece for a fireboard, but I might be able to carve a flat enough section that we can get the spindle on it. Let's head down kind of this direction. So the last piece that we really need, other than the bow, which I'm not going to show you today, would be some tinder, right? And the ideal tinder in Indiana is our state tree, tulip poplar. Like, it really doesn't get any better than that. The inner bark from a dead tulip poplar is just primo stuff. However, really don't have any tulip poplar in my valley. I don't know why, but somebody must have cut it all down, because it's pretty much everywhere in Indiana. It's our state tree. So there is one right here. It's dead, and I've just found this. You can see here. Now, on a tulip poplar, when you break off some of the dead material, there'll be some inner bark that you can fluff. This stuff is way not in the right condition to fluff. It will just crumble. It's just too far gone. So this would not work very good for tinder at all. You see a little bit of it there. Kind of peel some of it out. It's hard to hold my phone and do this at the same time. So yeah, you can see a little bit of it right there. So I would fluff that, but I would need a whole lot more than what this tree is going to give me. And it doesn't look like it's really in any good shape. Oh, fall down the hill. Kind of see a little bit of it there, where the bark is, but it's just really, it's no good at all for that. What we're looking for tinder, what we're looking for in a tinder is a material pretty similar to what a squirrel would fluff its nest out of. So just about anything a squirrel would use for its nest is going to be some pretty good material, and tulip poplar is a big one that they use. But I just noticed this tree over here, and I rarely ever use anything other than tulip poplar bark, because it's so common in our forest down here. Now, every place that you go on our planet is going to have different trees, different shrubs, different materials that you just have to learn and figure out. So what I've got here though is another source of tinder here in southern Indiana, and this right here is a red cedar, which is not like your white cedar that we were using in class. This is actually truly a juniper, even though it's called red cedar. This is the stuff that if you have a gerbil cage or a hamster cage, that really red smelly wood, this is it. So the inner bark, or the inner wood of this, the heartwood, is quite red and really aromatic and pretty stuff. But what's neat about this tree, I don't know if I can both hold my knife and do this for you with the phone. I'm gonna try. You can see a little bit right here. The squirrels will chew at this stuff to tear off pieces of it. Now this is a live tree, all right? So you can see the needles here. This is a live tree. I don't want to hurt this tree. I just want to use a little bit of its bark. So what I would do is I'd take my knife at a pretty close to a right angle, and I would just gently scrape it. Let me see if you can see here. And you can see, I don't want to go into the heartwood. It's windy up here. There we go. I don't want to go into the heartwood or even in through the cambium of the tree, but you can see on the outer bark these fibrous little things come up, and the more I scrape, the more I can pull these guys off. And it can be a slow process. This is really not the best red cedar for this. If I found one that the squirrels had been after, they would have done half the work for me and I could just pull off big pieces. But like I said, you don't want to scrape further in than just that outer bark, because you'll cut into where the tree's actually living. We just want to take enough off that we can use it without really hurting the tree. So I could keep scraping this down. It'd be a whole lot easier if I used my other hand to collect it as I went, but you can start to see there, I'm getting a nice little ball of tinder here, and it's like pre-prepared. If I just rub that between my hands a little bit, I will pretty much be all set for my ball of tinder. So I'll go ahead and collect a little bit of that here. See, it's just peeling right off. Lovely, beautiful stuff. Look at that. Yeah. So I just kind of give that a little fluff. And tinder ball. Almost there. A little ways to go, right? You want at least a good handful size of this stuff. So maybe I'll gather a little bit more of that before I head back down. And one last thing that I'm going to collect is some lubrication for my handhold. Now, in class we were just using some bar soap, and you can certainly do that at home if you want to try this out. But it just so happens that there's a really nice white pine tree over here. And white pines have needles that we could use for lubrication. If we crush up some of these in where the spindle meets the handhold, they work really well as a lubricant. It's a little tricky though, because it's hard to hold while you're doing it. But fortunately or unfortunately for the tree, the deer or something's been after it here and cut a hole in it here a little bit, and you can see this sap that's coming off of here. Oh, this is gold right here. I mean, it gets no better than this. This is 1,000,000 times better than soap. Look at that good stuff right there. That is plenty. I would just take a little bit of that, so I'll bring that with me. That's about all I need. Leave the rest for later. And I will get back with you after I finish carving some of these parts, and we'll see if we can put it all together.
One, go.
Okay, so I've put my set together here. I did some carving. You can see I split a piece for my handhold, and then I carved myself a nice hole in there. I haven't put any lubricant in there yet. We're gonna wait to do that until we burn it in a little bit. So the rest of the set is down here. I ended up making 2 spindles. You can always make more things than you think you need, because you probably will need them. The first one was too wide to fit on my fireboard, but remember, ideally your fireboard should be a thumb's thickness. This is a little thin. Can you see that? And about 2 thumbs wide, so it's definitely kind of lacking there. So it would be nice if you're making your own, try and find something that's a bit bigger and a bit thicker than what I've got there. Okay, about thumb thickness and about 2 thumbs wide. So the spindle also has to fit on the fireboard. That's why this big monster was really going to be kind of a no-go. So I made a smaller one. Then ideally what we do is set it on the edge of the fireboard, roll it in about a pencil's thickness from the edge, and stand it up. Now I had to kind of center mine it even just to get it to stay in here. So we're gonna go with that. This is survival, right? My fireboard's also not very straight, is it? So let me set my good stuff there. My sap. Got my handhold here. Go ahead and remember which way I had this set up. My spindle is not the straightest. I've got my tinder that you saw me making. It'd be nice to have a little bit more of that. But here we go. This is survival, right? Okay. Hand on there. Foot. Okay, if you'll notice, I'm a little bit uphill here. That's okay. It's just soft here on the moss. I'm at this nice right angle with my legs, and I want to bow very straight. Now, what I'm watching is the spindle. Don't try to watch the bow or your hand or your leg. Get all that stuff figured out, and then I'm going to watch the spindle to make sure it stays straight and I'm not tipping it any direction when I start to bow. Now, it's going to wobble a little bit because the spindle that I picked up, did I make a twist? I didn't make a twist in there. Let me get started with there. There we go. Okay, get back up again there. Okay, here we go. My wrist is locked to my shin, so my foot's pretty close to the spindle there. And then I'm going to bow nice straight strokes. I don't want to go up and down. I want nice parallel to the ground strokes. I don't want to drag my knuckles on the ground. I can also kind of control the string a little bit with my thumb on it. I can kind of push it down or pull it up. And I want to use the whole bow, the whole length of the bow. Now as I pick up speed, hopefully we'll start to smoke a little bit. There we go. You can see a little bit of smoke happening. Probably in the handhold as well. That's okay. I'd like to burn both of those in a little bit. You can hear the vibration. It's not the greatest, right? My spindle's not very straight. That's what that noise is. And I need to burn this until I get to the diameter of the spindle roughly. Okay. My string's getting a little bit loose. You'll notice I've been pushing down with my thumb on the string. That's to keep it tight. It's getting a little bit loose. I'm gonna go ahead and cut my notch now. So I'm burned in to about the diameter of my spindle. Now it's time to cut the notch. Okay.
That's it?
Yeah. Okay, so we've got ourselves bowed in here, and I wanted to show you guys the notch. It goes all the way down at a right angle, and it goes in towards the center, almost to the center, but not quite. So the center is right there. I kind of stopped just a little bit short of that. That'll keep your spindle from popping out on you. So take a look again. It's about 45-degree angle in, and it goes straight on through the board, right through the back of it. So the dust is going to collect in this. The notch is essential to the fire. Then I've got a leaf here, oops, that I'm going to make my fire on, my coal on top of. Okay, if I can get my fireboard's a little wobbly, so I'm trying to hold it in place there. My handhold right here is fully burned in. You can see it's nice and deep now. And what I'm going to add to that is a little bit of the sap that I collected. So I can just use the end of my spindle that's going to go into my handhold with that. I don't want to use the other end, right? I want lubrication up here. I don't want it in the other location. So I'm going to just use a little bit of that, and I'll hold the rest for later. Oh, that's some good, glorious stuff there. Look at that. Yum. See that? Okay. It smells good. So, are you going to add something, Del?
No.
Okay. So don't be surprised if you have to tighten your spindle your bow a few times. Typically you have to do that. Get all this stuff out of the way. So I've got my leaf here to catch my coal that comes out onto it. And this is probably going to squeak pretty loud, I'd imagine, when I start this. When you're set, once you first bow in, it will usually squeak a little bit. The fix for that is to bow faster and push down harder. Now, with the wood that I've got here, which is anything but optimal, smooth sumac is not the ticket to the best fire ever, trust me. I've never used smooth sumac before, but I've used staghorn sumac, close relative, and it was pretty poopy, so I wouldn't recommend it. And just carving this stuff, it's quite hard on the inside. I really would not recommend using it. So it's probably going to squeak like mad. So if you get a lot of squeak that you can't bow through, that you can't push down pressure harder through, probably it's really hard wood. So doesn't mean you can't make a fire, just means it's going to be probably super hard. Probably not the best wood to learn on. I've also got a little vibration going here. Okay, there we go.
All right.
Try and get myself moving before I start to go too fast. Okay, you want to say something, Del?
I was just going to talk while you bowed for a little bit.
Sounds good.
Since it's going to be a little bit. So when you're first burning your hole in, and you're always going to be asking yourself, hey, am I ready to carve the notch yet? Make sure you take a look at the end of your spindle, and that nice point you would put on it should be all the way rounded down, and the whole diameter of that spindle should be darkened in. Now, when you get to this phase, you're going to constantly ask yourself, when can I stop bowing? And that answer is when your notch is full and overflowing.
It looks nice and black.
Nice and black dust.
So my notch is full.
Yeah, you can. I'll get a little closer. You can see the notch is full. The shadow's right over. There's smoke when he
Let's
stops.
see if we've got enough.
If there's still smoke coming.
That's a good sign if there's still smoke.
Yeah.
Now we'll need some air. So I'm fanning a little bit, and you can actually see there's a bunch of striations in there. That's not so good. And I don't think we have a coal. I really don't think we have a coal.
If we do, it's a baby. Now,
Nope.
no coal. So the notch is full, so we don't want to disturb that. You can go ahead and go again.
Okay.
Now, if we were working with the white cedar that you guys would have had in class, a pile of dust that size would be a monster coal. It would be super easy.
Yes, it would be a coal immediately.
So.
I put a little bit more lubricant back in here. There we go. And we'll just adjust. See how crooked this is getting? This is due to the crookedness of my spindle. I can try and straighten that out a little bit. I don't want to make it a point again, because I don't want to dig down. I want friction. Now, one additional trick that you can use, see I'm kind of really blunting it this time. There's actually a hole in the middle. That's where all the ants came out a minute ago. This spindle is probably not dry. Neither is the fireboard. Oh, there's an ant. A few more left in there. I think they're pretty dizzy. Is to hollow point the spindle after you get it burned in. Just watch your fingers. The center of it spins the slowest. So that outside edge is where the most friction is happening. And I'd be willing to bet this wood is not dry enough. It would be ideal to let this sit for a little bit before we try again, just to let it dry some. But we're gonna go ahead and give it another shot, just for the heck of it. See if we can make something happen. I think I'm gonna burn through my board though before I get a coal on this one. It's looking that way anyway. Okay, some things out of the way here. Foot back on there. You get a nice red, orangish smoked spot on your foot from doing this. There we go. Back on there. Okay, let's see if we can't get this hot enough to ignite this dust.
Smoking again already. Now at this point it's just a race for ignition. But if the wood's too wet, it has to dry out first. Yellow dust.
Yep.
Not very dark though.
I think we're about through our fireboard. And I'm not sure we've got a coal. I don't think we're anywhere close to having a coal yet. It's pretty brown. So definitely wasn't optimal. We're a long ways from having a coal, I think.
Well, it's just slightly
No.
but I don't think so. Yeah.
Yep, we are not having
No
a coal. Totally burned through the fireboard though. So the next stop is to make another notch, make another hole, or make another hole and then make another notch, and then burn it in. So that's the basic steps. Sorry we didn't get a coal, but maybe we'll find some better wood. This is not, like I said, really optimal wood here. At least we've got a handhold though.
Good deal. Good.
Okay, so I took a little bit longer hike and collected some better materials. And like I was saying before, it's always you're always better off spending longer time gathering and looking for the right stuff. So what I made here, I've got a fireboard and a spindle made out of some big tooth aspen. It was a little bit damp, and one of the problems with this particular type of tree is that it does soak up moisture. So I carved it, I bowed it in, carved my notch, and then I let it sit for some time to kind of dry out a little bit. If you're doing this at home, you might want to try a couple of different types of woods just to get experience. Failing is not always a bad thing, because sometimes you learn an awful lot from doing that. So anyway, I let it dry out some, and if you gather some things, let them dry maybe a day or so, and you'll have some better luck. For your bow, I know I didn't really talk about that, but any piece of wood that's kind of dead and has a nice bend to it somewhat, doesn't have to look nice like this, doesn't have to be like steamed and bent like these are. Tie yourself a string around it somehow, and then go to work with it. But make sure it's not something that's so large you can't actually hold in your hand to bow. So we're going to give this a shot, see how it goes. What you'll notice here is that I saved all my old dust. That's from the other wood entirely, and I'm going to pack that back in my notch. So there's no sense in wasting that stuff. I don't have to create as much new dust now this time around. I better turn that a little bit. There we go. Can you still see it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. Get my foot on here. Okay. Now remember this, twisting the spindle in. This is how I like to do it. Oh, that's too loose. And Del showed you guys the method with putting it between your legs and bending it and twisting it in, putting a hand on either side of it. Either way is totally fine. Play with it, it's kind of like a puzzle. Eventually you'll figure it out. This. There we go. Expect to need to tighten your string at least a couple times, especially if it's the first time you've used a spindle. Okay, it's all set up. Everything's locked together nice and tight, and you can see I've got my strings right in the middle there. I'm going to start off kind of nice and slow, get my rhythm down, try and use the full length of the bow while you're bowing. A lot better smoke this time around, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So see how I'm getting nice long strokes on the bow. You can still hear a little bit of wobble on the spindle.
Not nearly as bad.
I'm going to pick it up a little bit here.
A lot more smoke. Dust looks a little darker also. You can see all the dust coming out.
String's slipping a little bit, so if we don't have a coal, we'll have to tighten the string. But looks like we've got one here. So what we're going to do now is we have lots of time. It needs a little bit of air. You could fan it a little bit, let the wind blow it a little, just don't let it blow it away. And you could use a twig or your knife, and we're just going to kind of help it out a little bit so it doesn't stick in the notch. Now I went a little bit extra because I want to make sure we got a coal that time. I probably had a coal a long time before that. Put all the rest of my dust on it. I worked hard for that dust. So I'm going to give this a second here because that coal will get as big as that pile of dust. Now let me work on my tinder a little bit because I didn't do much with this. So this came off of the red cedar, which remember is not the same as the cedar we gave you in class. Now it's kind of crumbly, so be kind of careful with it. I've roughed it up some, made a little bird's nest. Ideally I'd have a much bigger ball of this, right? But we're just kind of playing around here today. So I've kind of got this, got a nice little nest there for it. Now I'm just going to take my leaf, take my coal, come on, get it right down in there, all that good dust, hold on to all that stuff. And now the wind's going to do the work for me. If Del can see it there.
Mm-hmm.
You want to blow directly on the coal. Don't blow it through the tinder. Boy, I don't have much here, do I?
Not a lot. See it glowing though. Nice.
And there we go.
There's a little flame.
Right? Trying to put that down because it's going to burn my fingers. But I could keep blowing that.
If you were using this to light your teepee fire, you would have to keep blowing on it. It's not just going to magically go up
We can
in
build
flames.
ourselves a little fire here.
So we'll give you guys another video on teepee fire construction and lighting as we are sheltering in place.
There
you
it
go.
goes.
If you're using the jute fibers that we had for you to use in class, those are going to burn up a lot faster. So they're great for practicing, whereas the natural tinder lasts a lot longer, which is much better for fire building. So. All right.
Okay, there's a fire for you.
Yay, fire.